I don't know where you live. So it really does depend on the state you live in as to what the specific rules are, or how they're defining seclusion as opposed to timeout, or how they're defining restraint. I'm throwing that in there. Seclusion, meaning that your child is locked in a room and cannot leave, is wrong no matter where you are, okay? But there's this caveat in there about what is seclusion, and if there's a window, or if there's an adult in there, and if there's somebody standing outside the room looking in a window and monitoring your child, then there's all these nuances of gray areas that schools love to swim in, to sit there and justify what I consider cruel and unusual punishment, which is a violation of our Constitution or Bill of Rights. All right. And this goes into a situation to where, more attorneys like me need to start tapping these schools for cruel and unusual punishment. We don't even treat some of our prisoners in Supermax that have murdered people the same way we treat some of these kids in school. We just don't. I'm sorry, but that we've had years and years of the ACLU and other groups do as far as prison reform, to where they get treated better than some of our kids in public education. And these kids haven't done anything other than have a disability and I guess be around crappy adults. And I'm talking mean-spirited. I mean, I don't understand the obsession when a child has a behavioral incident or an infraction, because all children are dysregulated, because they're going through massive brain development and they can't regulate their emotions like adults should be able to. Some adults, even though they're adults past that age of dysregulation, which is around 25, still don't maintain or don't have good control over or regulation over their own emotions, to be able to control them, to be able to reason, to use logic over feeling. We don't even hold adults to the same standard we hold children, which is insane, the kind of impossible standard we hold children to. And then you put on top of it the additional deficits, in the form of a 504 and IEP that should provide more flexibility and understanding and compassion and flexibility to inane, stupid rules. And that's exactly what zero tolerance or board policies of student behavior. They are inane, stupid rules. Stupid rules. Instead of using these things as teachable moments to help guide children in learning to self-regulate and learning to self-monitor and in learning, no, we just punish because we want our pound of flesh. There's so many adults out there that they take this stuff personal. They take this infraction or the defiance from a student personally, instead of looking at it as the most noble profession and the most noble job to mold our future generations and to help guide them in all areas, not just math if you're a math teacher, not just history if you're a history teacher, but molding them in the curriculum, the hidden curriculum, which is a social emotional development, and understanding that your kid's going to make mistakes. Your students in your class are going to make errors. And what are you going to do? Because if it's just about punishing them, and if they're dysregulated and they don't have the capacity to appreciate and understand the punishment, then you're not punishing the child. You're punishing them to get your jollies, to make you feel better. And shame on you. That's disgusting. Okay? Because anything outside of the realm of having the child understand the gravity or corrective action, there's a big difference in how discipline is used. Big difference. All right. And just because, your parents did stupid things doesn't mean that you need to repeat the stupid things. And I look at society that way. Just because, you grew up in the South where, you don't spare the rod doesn't mean you keep doing the same stupid stuff and down that same path and not sparing the rod. Because I can tell you what, I am not a fan of spanking. I just, you know, was it done to me? Yeah. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I love my parents, but it was a different time back in the 70s and 80s. And my parents were world-class ass-whooping machines, like cyborgs. Joke. But I'm just saying that I'm not saying that I didn't deserve some of them. At the same time, do I look back and reflect as spanking ever being a deterrent on future actions? And never. Still did it. What works is sitting down and understanding that children will repeat mistakes. And it's my job, because adults repeat mistakes, and it's my job to help guide my children. And it's what my parents did. And, I come from a family of 8 kids, and my parents did an excellent job in guiding all of us. And I'm so appreciative of it. But they only spanked as a response to the fact that they were spanked, and then they were spanked. It just goes back. And sometimes we just perpetuate, just tradition. And I throw that out. I throw it out unless it makes sense. I didn't intend to have this diverge into a James Galini, therapy session for myself. But it goes back into the general discussion about what is the seclusion. And 2 incidents where your son was placed in a room, staff stood outside holding the door, preventing your son from leaving when he was screaming and crying. Well, it depends. I mean, you can sit there and say, is that wrong? Yes, it's wrong. But are they going to come back and say, well, there was a window, we were monitoring him, and we were only holding the door shut so that he didn't elope or for his own safety? I mean, they can come up with any excuse they want to. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that there's something called pretext. And is it a good enough excuse to satisfy a judge, for example? I've had many situations like that, and there's that gray area the government gives itself. Now, when you ended up saying something about it, and then all of a sudden they're sitting there going, well, this time they changed and locked me in the back room. Well, if that's the case, then there you have it. And I have many kids that will come home and report that they were locked in rooms, only to have the school say that the kid's a liar. If the child's always a liar, guys, I don't, sometimes children lie, but what would be the motivation for a child to come home and say, not that but I think it's a very, very rare incident, because at the same time they would be telling on themselves that they were not acting correct at school because they ended up in that closet for some reason, right? But we are not believing our children. And if we as parents are not, and this goes for you teachers too that have children, if we're not listening to our children, then we're also damaging them, because then they don't feel like they're being listened to, and they don't feel like they're being heard. And then they lose their trust in their parents, and it's our responsibility to protect our children. So I hope that you educators can understand and appreciate that, especially those of you that have your own children. So when our children are coming home and telling us that they were locked in a room, and then we come up to protect them, which is exactly our role as parents. And educators should be protecting our children as well and not putting them and locking them in closets. Then at that point, don't sit there and blame it on the kid and declare the kid a liar, because at that point, now you just lost the kid. Now the kid doesn't trust you. Now you've just created a hostile, damaging, and toxic environment for that child. You think that child wants to be there? Trust for somebody who is this size comparative to the adults that they see that are this size, it's a frightening thing. Do you not remember being a child, looking at all these big, huge people? You're vulnerable. So trust is a precious commodity when you're a child. And declaring everybody a liar, not a smart move. How would I end this? Very easy. If they're secluding your child, if they're locking him in a room, if he's screaming and crying, if he's not in his instructional setting, then your child's IEP is FUBAR. And it is absolutely messed up, screwed up, every which way you can imagine, because it is indicative of a behavior plan that either is non-existent or is not working. And you would have to fix it through a functional behavior assessment and a completely overhaul of the behavior intervention plan. And I would request that you have a third-party professional that has an expertise in behavior, like a board-certified behavior analyst, and find an ethical one, and find one that will train, that will consider your child the client instead of the school system. And if they are child-centered, and if they are observing your child and looking to fix this issue that will end up helping the educators as well, then that's exactly what you need. You need somebody in there with a fresh perspective and a neutral perspective to observe, to find out what the triggers are, to design a plan to eliminate those triggers, and then train the staff to a level of competency in your child's behavior intervention plan. The behavior intervention plan is for the school. It's an acknowledgement that your child cannot follow the student code of conduct and the rules as they're designed. While we have the behavior intervention plan, you need to go back, and the IEP team needs to create goals to address the behavior deficits that your child does have, and incorporate services that are going to work in conjunction with the plan, with the flexibility, to help your child gain skills that will then eliminate and start encroaching on the need for a behavior plan, period. But you got to have the services in order to move the behavior plan out of the picture to where it's not even necessary. That's how you solve this problem. But these things should not be happening. And like I said, it's indicative of a much bigger issue. But I don't know where you live. And if it happens to be somewhere where I practice, I'd take that case all day long. That's a strong case. That's a good case. And your school should recognize that that's a good case and work with you to try to avoid getting themselves entangled in corrective action. Okay?